Episode 83, When Your Teen Struggles with Substance Abuse, with Beth Hillman.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and certified through the Life Coach School. Together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with the coach? Here we go.
Everything is going exactly to plan is not what you would expect to hear from a parent who has a teen struggling with drug abuse. But Coach Beth Hillman has come through the fire of having a child deal with a drug addiction and can see that truly everything has gone exactly to plan. So much to plan that she would never go back and not go through all that she has to get herself and her son to where they are today. If you are a parent who has a child struggling with drug abuse and you are feeling like your life is spiraling out of control and all is lost, please listen to this episode. It is one that will not only give you hope to keep moving forward, but some great tools to help you along the way.
Well, welcome to the podcast, everybody. Thanks for being here with us today. And I am excited to be joined by Coach Beth Hillman. I am going to let her introduce herself and we will go from there. Hey, Beth, how are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thanks for being here.
You bet. You bet. I'm thrilled to be here. Super glad. And I love to share my story because I feel like it resonates with so many parents. And that's what I do. I coach parents.
Okay. Well, I know the people, the niche that you work with, but I would love for you to share who you work with and how you kind of came into coaching, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us this morning.
Yeah,
this afternoon, whatever time of day people are listening to this.
Yeah, you bet. So we have 5 boys, my husband and I, and our 4th son, when he was about 15, got into substances, mostly drugs. Mm-hmm. There was a variety of flavors that he enjoyed. And, we didn't know what was going on. Like most parents, we were aware, we were involved, running to swim lessons and all this stuff and busy with our lives and having, evening dinners together, like all the quote check marks, I guess, that supposedly are there.
Yeah.
But our son started showing lots of signs of being super angry. So we found out that he was on drugs. He actually told us, that's not very common.
Yeah.
Right. And then we sort of went down everything fell apart after he told us, which was really interesting because sometimes when parents oh my gosh, we found out what's going on, we've hit rock bottom and now we can get back up again. But that is not what happens actually typically. And so everything basically fell completely apart. Our son stopped coming home. We didn't know where he was, who he was with. We basically lost all of our parent role stuff. I guess. And he just kind of did what he wanted and we didn't know what we were doing. And it was just sort of a mess. Oh. So basically we got him into wilderness therapy. It's a therapy. It's typically about 12 weeks and the kids go outside and Mother Nature sort of does her magic. And if the humans stay mostly out of the way, Mother Nature does a very good job at holding natural consequences. And so we got him into that. After that, we moved so he couldn't get the drugs from the people that he was always getting them from. And he was clean for a while. And then he found the drugs again, which is very common. It's called recidivism. And because we were working with some of the underlying issues of why he got into drugs in the first place, we hadn't really, figured them out. And so he started doing drugs again. And then I lost it. I have never probably yelled and screamed so much in my entire life. I was a very reactionary person. So yeah, I was doing some yelling and screaming, but I kind of had a mental breakdown, to be completely honest. And that's not diagnosed or anything. That's just kind of my own label and I'm fine with it. I disappeared. And I'm kind of telling you the long story, but this is a part that I feel like is so important to be authentic with. I choose to tell this part, and because it's not just about my son, it's not just about his struggle with drugs. It was about my struggle with how to cope with someone you love making really hard decisions, really difficult decisions that are destroying themselves. It's very, very hard to know what to do and how to act like a parent and do all this stuff. And so instead of reacting, I just disappeared in my head, right? I just stopped being emotional. I shut down. I started to go on these long drives. I would go I had a 3-year-old at the time, and then this 15-year-old, and then our other boys were off doing their adult things. But I put him in daycare, and I would just drive for like hours and hours, wondering if I would ever come home. I did not want to be apart. I thought I was the worst mom in the world. I thought my son's better off without me. I'm like, my husband can just take care of him. Nobody needs me. I have never thought those things in my entire life. And I just want to start out by saying, it is okay. It is okay to not know what you're doing. And I run into that a lot with parents that I help, these struggling parents with kids who are in substance abuse, or kids who are suicidal, or kids who are these maladaptive behaviors. It's just really hard to witness. And that took about 6 or 8 weeks. I was really struggling with literally like deciding if I wanted to show up in my life at all. Mm-hmm. And my brother, who I have a very good relationship with, said, like, honey, I think you need some help. And I was like, no, like my son needs help. And he's like, no, you need help. And it was just like, it was like a dong on my head, like a bong or something. It was like, what? That's funny. I said bong. That's kind of funny. But no.
Par for the course.
I know, right? That's so funny. The irony. Yeah, it was just like a hit over the head. Like, he is right. I do not know what I'm doing. I do not know how to show up for my son who's making these really hard choices. That's what led me to life coach school. I talked to a life coach. She spent 2 hours on the phone. I was desperate, crisis. And she gave me hope. That's what she did. She just helped me know that we weren't at the end, like that it wasn't all wrapped up, that there was a future to decide on. And then I was like, instead of hiring you, I want to be you, which is very funny.
It's not funny that I think many of us do that.
Yes. I think many of us do that.
Yes.
And I thought, well, I don't have 4 years to be a therapist, or 8 years for Pete's sake. I have limited time to help my kiddo, which isn't a very helpful thought, but he was, 16 and he's getting older. I'm like, anyway, so that's what I did. I decided to sign up for life coach school. And it was funny because some coaches have a hard time with their niche. Like, who am I going to help? How am I going to, and mine was known from the very beginning. I'm like, oh, duh, I need to be helping parents with struggling teens. That is what I need to be doing. And, you have all those doubt thoughts. Like, how am I supposed to help other parents when my kiddo is, quote, not figured out yet? I haven't figured this out yet. And I actually hired a coach right out of my certification, right out of the gates. And he said, that is total BS. Stop it. You are in the middle of it, which means you must be helping the other parents because you are exactly where you need to be. Yeah. And then that switched everything for me. And I just dove straight in.
I think it's so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us and recognizing that that's a personal story and not probably something that's hasn't always been easy to share. I don't know where you sit now, but how important it is for us. And you said something like, how can I help people when my relationship with my son is still kind of up and down? And the honest truth is that it isn't always necessarily about the relationship with the other people. It's the relationship with ourselves. And so you doing the work with, a coach or becoming a coach, you're really doing work within yourself, and your relationship with yourself is the one that's actually healing, and figuring that out is what makes you capable and able of then having a relationship with your son or not having one. It really depends in large part up to them, but being okay with whatever that relationship might look like.
That is exactly right. Because what I had learned going through coach certification was what I can control, right? Which was me, is that and then it was not about my son anymore. It was honest to God about me. Mm-hmm. Like I wanted to change how I reacted, how I thought about him, what I thought was going to happen to him, what I thought his potential was, how he listened to me. It was so shockingly in my court. Mm-hmm. And when he was going through all the serious drug addiction stuff before Wilderness, I felt like I had zero control. Mm. But I didn't realize that I was just trying to control him. And I do have zero control over him, turns out. But the more control I have over me, then that's what I started to figure out, oh my gosh, I have a huge influence over my children. Mm-hmm. I can have a huge influence over them. Mm-hmm. And when I stopped reacting, when I stopped being so triggered by him, when I stopped taking things so personally, like him saying the F word at me, for instance, I used to take it so personal, oh, how could you say that? We don't use that in our home. And it's just whoa, whoa, whoa. And he will tell you this right now. He's 20 right now. He would say, oh, it wasn't about me at all. He wasn't swearing to make me mad or to get at me, or he wasn't doing that on a conscious level. He was just mad and he swore. And so, but once I figured that out, it was like a boundary. That was it. That's all I had to do was put a boundary. And guess what? That boundary wasn't about taping my son's mouth shut.
Wouldn't we like to do that though sometimes?
Well, that crossed my mind a dozen times.
Yeah.
It was about me removing myself from the space that was being sworn in. So I'm like, hey, guess what? I don't want to hear that language. So I'll go ahead and talk to you when you're done swearing. Anytime you let me know. And I would leave. Genius. It was genius. And it's so hard because as parents, we're like, that's disrespectful and all these things. And it's like, what if it wasn't? What if it's just words? And if you don't want to hear it, walk away.
Two things here. First of all, I would love for you to expand a little bit upon boundaries, because I think that that's something that we can all implement and use in our lives better. I think we misunderstand them. But also, I think, something you said there, you didn't, the language that he was using. And you also talked about letting go of some of the beliefs you had, like believing that he was ruining his life and believing that he wasn't going to ever be able to do, and believing that he was using language that wasn't good or proper or whatever. We think we want to hold on to those beliefs. We think that there's no way that we should let go of that belief because it feels really unsafe. It feels like, well, once I let go of those beliefs, then all hell's going to break loose, basically, right? We think that it's those beliefs that are keeping them even somewhat close to safety or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it's really hard, I think, when people hear us say we needed to let go of some of those beliefs, that can feel really terrifying to even consider letting go of some of those sorts of things.
Yeah. I mean, if you were to say I'd like my children to respect me as a parent, that sounds like the most lovely and obvious comment of all time. I hear that from my lovely clients all the time. I just want my child to respect me. Mm-hmm. Terrific. Well, one, are you being respectful to your child? Which is always a really tough question. And if I were to answer that back then, the answer was no. I was yelling at him. I was being super emotionally consequencing to him. I would change my mind at the last minute, you don't deserve that, so never mind. And that's not respectful. I would blow my stack at him because from fear, from pain, yes, but I was still blowing my stack. Is that respectful? No. So one, that's a really tough question. That's a big ask. Am I emulating respect to my children? Mm-hmm. And if you are, great. If you aren't, that's okay. Just be observant and aware, right? And it's just, the bottom line is it's not about disrespect. It's really about your child probably feeling fear, blame, disappointment in themselves. And they're reacting from their thoughts and feelings. And then parents are sometimes reacting from their thoughts and feelings. And it's just a mess of defensiveness and blame.
Yeah.
It's really not personal.
Yeah.
Right. There's business and there's personal. And I think something like that is really just like, let's say boundaries. It's just business.
Right.
These are the rules.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue into talking more about boundaries, because when we can figure out boundaries and the proper way to set them and follow through with them, we are being respectful of ourselves and the other person involved. And sometimes we think that boundaries and respect don't really coexist very well, but that's really when we ultimately have respect, when we do withhold boundaries for ourselves and other people.
Yeah. Boundaries can be really hard because I just had a client say yesterday, well, I just want a more casual summer. I'm like, okay, well, are boundaries not casual? Like, why are boundaries and casual being compared? So in other words, she was saying boundaries are super tough and tight and really involved,
Mm-hmm.
and non-boundaries are casual.
Mm-hmm.
But that is actually counter. Like that's the actual opposite. Because if you have specific, clear set boundaries, well, you have actually more freedom. Your child has more freedom to choose, and you actually have the freedom to if you have a successful boundary consequence situation set up, then you are actually freer to be the parent you want to be.
Can you give us an example? Do you have an example you could share with us on that? Like how setting them does end up freeing you up?
So yesterday, a client said to me, we were talking about the summer. So summer's coming and so many parents, of course, are concerned. What is my kiddo going to do with too much free time? Summer is a lot of free time typically.
Right.
So the parents want to kind of start micromanaging and meaning like set schedules for their kids, get jobs for their kids, set up like day camps and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a mom came to me and she was like, okay, so if my son's going to be to work from like 8 to 3, then I think we're going to have video time from 3 to 6. And then at 6 o'clock, we'll have dinner. And she was literally, and this is a 15, 16-year-old, right?
Mm-hmm. They're going to love that. They're going to love having it.
Yeah. I'm sure they're going to sign right on the dotted line for all that. Right. And so we do want the boundaries to be age appropriate. So I have a 6-year-old and I do manage quite a bit of his day. I do, but I do not and would not consider managing my 20-year-old's day. And they're all gone. They all live out of the house anyway. So I literally don't do anything for them, but except to love them. Gosh. Ooh, yes. Love those guys.
The best part.
So this mom, I was like, okay, let's look at that for a second. What do we really want to be doing as parents? And it was like, whoa, she's like, I want to teach my kid how to set their own schedule. I want to help him understand time management. I want to help him make better choices with his freedom. And I said, okay, so you scheduling everything for him, how is that being the parent you want to be? And she was like, whoa, right? Because as parents we're like, oh, but I just want his schedule to be done. I want to know, it's that expectation thing. I just want to know what he's going to be doing. So I don't worry that he's going to be too much time on his screens. And I said, okay. So then she realized like, oh, wait, I actually don't, because that's not teaching time management. If you're scheduling your entire 16-year-old's day out, that's micromanaging. That is not helping them be good time managers.
Right.
You're like, wait a second. How am I going to help my kiddo be a better time manager? Well, you might have to give him some time to manage. Right? And that's what's so hard because
gosh darn it.
I know it is not the obvious answer. Literally the obvious answer is I'll just do it all for him. That way I'll know. And that's what we got caught up in as parents. But it's really, if you think about it, it's not how you want to show up. So I encouraged her and coached her to, where can we give him some freedom for this brilliant 16-year-old that makes sense in your home? Because we still want to have freedom within boundaries. So I give this analogy about like parents are farmers and we've got these cows, and these cows are learning how to know what's safe. Like, is that grate safe? Is the fence safe? Is the grass safe? Like, what's outside? And the cows are just going to start wandering. And so what we want to do as parents, we want to set up an age appropriate fence for them to roam around in. But teenagers' job, and I say job meaning like child developmentally, it's to test. That's what they're supposed to do. Because how are they supposed to know society's rules, parents' rules, home rules, school rules, unless they test and they figure out, oh, I can step there, I can't step there, I get in trouble if I do that, da, da, da. So they're constantly trying to figure it out. So the problem with boundaries is that parents look to their child for if it's working or not. So if they push back, parents think, this is too hard. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be mean, quote unquote, mean. And that's back to that, what I was saying before about, about what's really hard and what's really easy.
Mm-hmm.
That it was like,
yes,
what's casual and what's clear.
Yes, casual and clear according to summertime boundaries and things like that.
Yes. So anyway, so it really does make sense to build a fence, a container, and then give them the freedom within the container. Mm-hmm. So with this certain mom, I suggested, we don't really know his work schedule. That's up to him and his boss. So why don't you just put a cap on screen time, which is fine, but let him decide when that is. Let him decide when he's going to do the screen time. Let's say she was looking between like 2 and 3 hours a day. That's a parent's choice. So I said, okay, between this 2 and 3 hours a day, what if he got to decide when that was? And you can put other rules or boundaries like, hey, I'd like you for dinner. And if you don't show up for dinner, then your hours will be, shortened. And so there's boundaries and consequences you can put in that give them freedom enough to roam around and test, but then also anything you can automate within I'm just going to throw that out there. If you can automate a boundary, that is gold. That's the magic. So she actually hired a technician, like a computer technician, to come into her home and give everybody like their own, like Wi-Fi channel. I don't know what a specific login. Okay. And then that way she can manage. It's like genius. Automate that stuff. So that's an example of a boundary and a consequence. And the trick is to figure out like how much freedom, how little freedom, and it depends on the kid. It depends what they've experienced and their gender and their, friends and what they've got going and the sports and the work. It's so individual.
Yeah. And it's not, And I think to your point, that we think sometimes we get it figured out with one kid. And so then we can just do that same thing with every other kid, and it doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. My son, who struggled with addiction, he had 3 older brothers. They didn't. Mm-hmm. So for so long, I thought, well, it must be him, the 4th son. It just must be him. It's all him. And that was not only unhelpful, but not true.
Yeah.
So just what you're saying, like they're so different. Like each child needs something different, and it's a work, and to try. It's our work if we choose to accept it as parents to like try to figure out what do they need.
Yeah.
From me, and how can I change and be flexible with each child's needs.
Right.
That's a good question.
There's this piece, we talked about our relationship with ourselves, and the more we can improve that and come to understand ourselves and what our wants and our values are and the kind of parent we want to be, plays such a big role in the relationship we have with our children. I would also imagine that something else that you have to sift through is the judgments that you have of yourself and the judgment that you see other people having about you and your child as well when you are in a situation like yours.
I'm actually so glad you brought that up, because when everything started happening, I would go to church and I would just I would stand in the hallway. I think it was in primary or something at the time. I would stand in the hallway and literally I stopped looking people in the eye. I stopped asking. I'm pretty social. Mm-hmm. And I just literally was like, don't see me. You might find out that I'm a terrible mom. Like you might find out how much I failed my son. What if they find out? And I just was so scared to let anyone know what was going on. And it's so interesting because this is so odd, but like 6 months before we found out what was going on, a neighbor of mine, my sweet neighbors, one of them said to me, "Oh my gosh, your family's just so perfect." And I almost threw up. And I hadn't been to coach training. I didn't know anything except, oh, no. Like that is not what's happening in anyone's home. I don't care if you're Mormon or Catholic or Muslim or Black or white or blue. I do not care. No one's home is perfect. And please don't assume something better or worse is going on in somebody else's home. That was very difficult to hear. But what's interesting, it wasn't her judgment. It was my judgment that was released into my being and my mind and my thought, and my body was like, oh my gosh, you have no idea how much of a failure I am. And then, we find out what my kid's doing, and I wanted to disappear. And I feel like that's very, very common across the board of parents who have these children who are making super hard decisions. You feel like you're the only one. You feel so desperately alone. You feel like there's no one who would understand. You feel like there's nowhere to go. It's stifling, but that is not truth. That is a story in our primitive brains. It's like almost a coping thing.
Yeah.
I think is what our brains do. Like, this is too hard, too much. I remember leaving church because I just couldn't take what I thought was their judgment. They had no idea what was going on. It was my judgment on me. So lots of judgment.
That's such a hard thing. A couple of weeks ago, my brain was just spinning out on some things, and I was trying to go to sleep. It was late and I just couldn't relax, but my brain was like coming up with all the different things, different judgments people had, things that I thought people had about me, judgments I had about myself, all the things. And I finally just took a deep breath and was like, okay, Heather, what do you need right now? Like, why is this coming up? And the thought came to me, remember when you had babies and they just cried uncontrollably when they were tired? Like, it made no sense to me, but they just like, why can't you just go to sleep? Why do they have to cry when they're tired? Right. But the thought came, remember that those crying babies when they were tired, that's just was their reaction. That's just what they knew what to do when they were tired. And this is just what your brain does when you feel unsafe, when you feel tired, when you feel it's like equivalent to the babies crying. This is what your brain does. And that has really been kind of a gift for me to understand that when my brain starts to spin out on judgments or the things that I think are maybe wrong, I just take a step back and ask, what is it what's really the problem here? Oh, I'm really tired, or, oh, I'm feeling unsafe for some reason. I don't need to believe this story.
Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot, actually. And that validation and compassion for one's being, that is something I learned as well through helping myself and helping my son. It's just that compassion and true like love will help all.
Yeah.
It's the judgment that is keeping us stuck and keeping us quiet and keeping us alone. As the truth was, once we started we actually it's so funny. We think no one's going through this. And then we literally start thinking of the people in our ward who have gone through it. And luckily we actually they had been expressing themselves. So we knew. So it's so funny. It's like your brain saying, don't let anybody know. And it's like, wait. There's so many people here. So we reached out to several, sometimes, let's say, higher up in the church and in our ward. And they were, all lovely and helpful and kind and compassionate, and the opposite of what my brain thought, of course.
Right.
And that was one of the reasons why we actually looked into wilderness therapy for our son, because the son and the dad both met with us. That was probably one of the first people we reached out to. And the son was in recovery and doing amazing. And it had been, maybe 8 years for him. And they were just like, Beth, get him into wilderness. It changed our lives. And so we started to be willing to ask, what do we do? How can we help him? And that opened up all the doors for the wonderful, kind humans that are really readily available to most of us to express and help. And that was one of the main reasons I'm like, I want to be that voice. I want to share and be authentic with how hard this experience was/is, and give permission to others to not be so alone.
Yeah. And what happens is that desire you had to kind of shrink and not look in anybody's eyes, is that's a reaction to shame, like thinking there's something wrong with you. And shame always makes us want to hide, but shame, I don't think ever comes from God. And it's actually, I think, is a tool of the adversary, right? Because it does make us revert inward and want to hide. And we don't get help ever when we are hiding. Like the only way we can progress is to open up and seek help and love and direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is kind of crazy. This just dawned on me, but the opposite of shame is being willing to be human.
Mm-hmm.
It's that
yes.
I choose, sometimes good, and I choose sometimes bad all the time. I am always getting to choose one or, and of course there's all the stuff in the between.
Right.
But shame makes me feel like there's nowhere to go now, or there's nothing to make, that's the end. You're done. It's all over. You failed. Like that's
like you're damned, right? Like you've been damned. You cannot progress anymore. And that's exactly what the adversary would like us to believe. And that's exactly what won't get us anywhere. That won't make us like, we can't live. We can't be happy from that place.
No. Yeah, it was definitely the shame. And what's so crazy is these children, and I mean young adults too, I mean teens and young adults who are making these really tough decisions, they are dealing with so much shame and guilt, especially in the LDS religion, may I propose. And so
I have to say, I don't think that is unique just to the LDS religion. I think most kids in every religious culture, because we do have this rhetoric of like, in most religious faiths, of God being a damning God and there's consequence. I'm agreeing with you 100% on that. I'm just saying, I don't think it's just us. I think it's out there. But anyway, please continue on, because I'm glad you said that.
You're right. I'm glad you caught that, because that is something I'm working on.
But I agree with you. Our kids hear way too much of that, and they feel way too much shame and judgment in the way we teach, in the words we say, all the things.
It sets them up, I think, a little bit to feel like they failed as a human.
Yes.
When they're not, they're just experiencing being human.
They're just experiencing humanity. They're experiencing exactly what they are supposed to be experiencing.
Yeah.
So that is our mission and our job, I think, as parents and as leaders, is to learn to change the way we speak about things, to shift some perspectives and not be so like, this is it, and not be willing to like look at the way that we speak.
It's so interesting. You mentioned this a little bit earlier about how we change our thoughts or perception as parents. And one of the things that I did, it was actually a joke at first. Like I literally was making a joke out of our lives, our circumstances at the time. And I started to say to myself, what if everything was going exactly according to plan? And I literally would say it like with a sinister kind of like totally sarcastic, joking way, because it was so miserable and so hard. But shockingly, and yet not shockingly, because our thoughts are so powerful, it started to shift into, what if things are going exactly according to plan? What if this is what my son was supposed to experience? What if this is the lessons, that we needed as a family to change and grow and lift ourselves to a different awareness and consciousness? It's been 4.5 years, and that has come true in every way. My 20-year-old, this beautiful boy, has learned to self-regulate, has learned self-respect, has learned to dig in, is completely independent and self-sufficient. I am just like, all of those brothers, I mean, they're all doing really great, but they'll be like, whoa, this kid is on fire. And you know what's so interesting? It's not like he's checking off all the boxes that society would think, but he learned something so significant from his experience and about himself. I would say he's probably more aware than 95% of the human population.
I think most of us walk around very unaware of many things in our lives and how we're experiencing them. So this is making me think of a quote that I would love for you to comment on. So it's a quote by Byron Katie that says, the people we most need are the people we're living with now. Again and again, they will show us the truth we don't want to see until we see it. Our parents, our children, our spouses, and our friends will continue to press every button we have until we realize what it is that we don't want to know about ourselves yet.
That is one of my favorite quotes of all time, because it is truth handed to us, right?
And we don't like to hear that, because it makes it means that there's something like in us. We don't want it to be about us.
Yeah.
But yet having it be about us is actually so good, because we can actually control us.
Yeah. That was like a total epiphany that I was part of the problem. I was like, what? I'm not handing my kid drugs. What are you talking about? It was like I was doing all of it or none of it. And I was sitting in the I'm doing none of it state, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that idea, it was proposed to me actually while my son was at Wilderness, and they had a parents' weekend, and we got to go, and we did this huge seminar. It was all day seminar. And then we got to go into the field with our kids. And I remember listening to this, and it's Arbinger Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually am a facilitator for it now. It's called Living with an Outward Mindset. So I decided once I was willing to admit that I was part of the problem, I then realized I could be part of the solution. And that was probably one of the biggest epiphanies and gifts to myself, that if I was part of the problem, I could become part of the solution. That meant everything to me. And living with our family members and our children who makes these crazy decisions. And I would never go back. I mean, that is shocking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want to help with these parents. I want to help them realize this is part of your journey too. And I believe I am having at least a small impact in the whole therapeutic industry with therapeutic schools and programs and Wilderness, is that the parents must be involved. They must, because it's not just a kid issue. It's not just a child issue. It's a family dynamic issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I was trying to be the best parent I could, turns out I could be a better parent.
Yeah. Well, and I think that feels scary for people, because it feels like there's blame, like somebody's putting blame on them. And it really isn't about blame at all. It's not a blame towards your child. It's not a blame. You're not blaming you. There's no blame. It's just circumstances and humanity and a life experience.
The quote that it's no one's fault, but everybody's responsibility.
Oh, I love that.
I know. And that feels like 100% true. It's nobody's fault, but we're all responsible.
And so empowering, right? Isn't that just all we need, is to feel empowered? Because it's when we feel the shame and we feel hopelessness, there really doesn't feel like there's any power, that we don't have any control. And everything that you've said really brings it back home. It puts power in our own hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does, which is the best place to have it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I could have this conversation all day. As we winding up, I'm wanting to know if there's anything you wanted to share or talk about that we haven't talked about yet today.
I just want to say, so I coach parents with struggling kids. Most of the time they're coming home from treatment. So like a therapeutic boarding school, a residential treatment center, or Wilderness therapy.
Okay.
Because what's so great about the kids being home is that they are triggering you and you're triggering them. And then we can actually get some real work done when everyone's in the same home. And I know that that's not always possible. So I'm happy to coach the parents if their kids are in treatment. So I kind of do both. But my real niche I'm finding is really, if you're bringing your kiddo home, please give me a call and I will help you transition them home.
I can imagine that it is a big transition, so mixed with excitement to have and joy to have them home with you, but probably also a lot of fear and trepidation and not knowing how it's going to go or any of that.
Ever a basket of emotions. It's bringing your kid home, just like we did. We brought our son home from Wilderness and all that is involved. It is a lot of transition. It's huge. And I would highly, highly suggest you get somebody to help. Somebody, for sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your story. And all the things that go along with it. Will you please share with people where they can find more of you?
Sure. So my website is bethhillmancoaching.com. And I'm available in email. You can get me through my website. And I am doing a podcast, but it hasn't launched yet. And I can't even tell you the name. But if you go to my website, bethhillmancoaching.com, I promise it will be there very shortly. We've already recorded 10. We just haven't produced it yet.
Oh, I love it. We will also link to your, if you go to your bio on Latter-day Saint Life Coach directory, we can also add that link there too for you. But we will link to all of these things in the show notes so people can find them and have you as a resource, because I don't know anybody else that does what you're doing.
Well, I'm doing it with gusto.
Well, I think it's awesome. So thank you. Thank you for being with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me so very much. I've just loved it.
Oh, well, have a good one, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.